Hey everyone, and thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Today's presentation is one that I am super excited for because I'll be showing off something that I actually put a lot of work into and a concept that I suspect may be new and interesting to some of you. I won't beat around the bush. Today we are talking about what I believe may well be the most practical rifle, which you probably don't already own, and that's going to be this little monster here. For the purpose of this video, I'll be calling this the TORSS, or Tactically Optimized Rimfire Survival System. Conceptually, this is pretty simple. My goal was to take a well-proven concept, the 22LR survival rifle, and elevate it for the 21st century. More specifically, I wanted to combine the versatility, sustainability, and low signature of the 22 long rifle cartridge with the durability, ergonomics, and force multiplying technological enablers of the modern combat carbine. Additionally, I wanted to devise a compact and easily man-portable ecosystem of sustainment modules which streamline logistics and extend survivability under the widest range of civilian survival situations. Put as bluntly as possible, this weapon is intended to fill the same niche as something like a Ruger 1022 Takedown or a Henry AR-7, except it's going to absolutely mop the floor with those in terms of feature set and capabilities. With all that in mind, if you share my persuasion that bug-out or grab-and-go rifles have a place in the disaster mitigation plans of responsible citizens, or perhaps you just got upset when I said rimfire and tactical in the same sentence, stay tuned because we're going to unpack all that and more, and ultimately I'll show you why I have come to believe that this is one of the most practical firearms that I own. The conceptual journey of the TORSS began for me a few years back when my home was unexpectedly threatened by wildfire. To make a long story short, I had to evacuate on an extremely condensed time frame, and consequently, I got some valuable real-life experience in a bug-out type scenario. One of my takeaways from that experience was dissatisfaction in my practical firearm setup. Prior to the wildfire, I had rather uncritically assumed that something like this, a Title I clone of my old Army service rifle, would be my go-to for just about any emergency situation I might find myself in. On that day, however, as I was tossing loaded bandoliers, a chest rig, and 5.56 battle packs in my car, I found myself experiencing the uncomfortable realization that this weapon was not actually what I wanted in that moment. In retrospect, I probably should have known better. If I had done anything resembling an intellectually honest MET-TC assessment, which for those who don't know is basically just a military framework for realistic mission planning, I probably would have recognized the flaws in my system. The thing is, civilian survival situations often require people to navigate extremely condensed reaction windows, which are populated by complex and emerging problems with zero logistic support. In my case, I determined that I had about 10 minutes to load my car, and I understood that there was a moderate to high likelihood that anything I left behind was going to be incinerated. 10 minutes is not a lot of time to establish and execute priorities of work, which in this case included locating and securing a range of important items, all the while snapping photos of the things which I couldn't grab for insurance purposes, while simultaneously planning my driving route and communicating with friends, family, and neighbors. I wasted more than 2 minutes of that precious time dealing with 5.56 ammunition alone, and even still, I drove off with less than 1,000 rounds. In other words, I spent way too much time loading way too little ammo. To fast forward a bit, I was quite fortunate in the sense that my house did not ultimately burn down, and within a day or two, I got to return to my personal status quo. I took this opportunity to go back to the drawing board and try to correct the deficiencies I had discovered, however, as I would like to be better prepared in case I'm ever faced with a less forgiving situation in the future. Thus began my quest to discover and establish my own take on the optimal general-purpose civilian application survival rifle. So now that we know where this concept came from, let's address the elephant in the room, which is of course the 22 long rifle cartridge. In addition to being one of the most popular and objectively successful cartridges in human history, it is also one of the most polarizing. In a nutshell, the 22LR is extremely low powered compared to other cartridges, and not everyone agrees on just how significant that is. Like many polarizing firearm debates, there are highly experienced and reasonable people on pretty much all sides of the issue, just as there are blubbering morons and everything in between. With that in mind, please understand that over the next couple of minutes, I'm going to make a couple of appeals to authority, as there are a number of highly respected individuals and organizations with similar opinions to my own. However, I encourage you to take that all with a grain of salt, as there are equally respectable figures who vehemently disagree. I do not have such an inflated opinion of myself to believe that I could meaningfully shift a debate, which is far older than I am. However, I can give you an explanation as to why I have taken the position that I have. As I alluded to earlier, my opinion on cartridge evaluation basically comes down to mission dependence. I don't generally think of cartridges as objectively good or bad, but rather I tend to think of them as subjectively advantageous or disadvantageous. Exactly where they fall on that spectrum really comes down to what you're using them for. With that in mind, here are the reasons why I have determined that for my civilian survival rifle application, the 22LR is a subjectively advantageous cartridge. The 22LR cartridge is approximately 4 times lighter, smaller, and cheaper than the 5.56 or 9mm. That means that for every 30 rounds of a low-weight centerfire cartridge, you can carry about 120 rounds of 22LR. That adds up very quickly. In practice, that transforms a magazine into a combat loadout into a stockpile, and a stockpile into a lifetime supply. It is impossible to overstate how significant this is when one considers the logistic realities of many civilian survival situations. With 22, I can grab more ammo faster, I can carry more ammo further, and I can keep putting rounds downrange for longer. Some people say they don't feel adequately armed with the 22, and there are very good reasons for this. However, the other side of that argument, from my perspective, is that a loaded 22 is a far more effective weapon than an empty battle rifle. Inferior ballistics are a problem, yes, but they are a workable problem. Going black on ammo is not a workable problem. It's the end of the conversation. And that's really the crux of my position. I'm not suggesting that the 22LR is in any way an appropriate alternative to proper anti-personnel cartridges. I am saying that 22LR is a vastly superior alternative to running out of ammo. And when we look at the logistic realities of some, possibly many civilian survival situations, that's the choice we want to get ahead of. Beyond that, the 22 long rifle is an inherently quiet cartridge with functionally negligible recoil, minimal muzzle blast, and an extremely low flash signature. Within the confines of the cartridge's effectiveness, it is extremely easy to use at its full potential. In other words, a shooter of a given skill set will generally be able to shoot 22LR faster and more accurately than a more powerful round. Additionally, firing a 22LR weapon with a rifle-length barrel is much less likely to attract unwanted attention than virtually any other category of firearm. Finally, despite its obvious and well-established underperformance in terms of power, range, and terminal effect, the 22 is not, as some people claim, a toy. In fact, some data indicates that the 22LR has probably killed more American non-combatants than any other cartridge in history. Now, before you freak out in the comments, please realize this does not indicate exceptional lethality on the part of the 22LR. It actually indicates exceptional prevalence on the part of the 22LR. After all, dogs kill far more Americans than sharks do, but nobody would interpret that statistic to mean that a Pomeranian is more lethal than a great white. The only takeaway here is that 22s are not toys, and there are a bunch of dead people who would attest to that if they could. Now, it's also prudent to distinguish between a cartridge's ability to be lethal and a cartridge's ability to stop a fight. If you don't understand the difference between those things, the textbook example is the 1986 FBI Miami shootout, in which federal agents inflicted lethal but not fight-stopping wounds early in a pitched gun battle. Consequently, the individuals they were engaging were able to kill several agents after they had been mortally wounded, but before they succumbed to those injuries. The point here is that inflicting lethal wounds is not inherently helpful in a gunfight. Whether your adversary dies in 2 minutes or 40 years is immaterial. What really matters is they stop fighting, and they stop fighting right now. All that is simply to say that I do understand terminal ballistics and gunfighting theory, and I'm not pretending like the 22LR is on a level playing field with proper anti-personnel cartridges, even if it has been responsible for a huge amount of death in this country. I'm simply emphasizing that there is a significant gap between optimal and useless, and the 22 exists somewhere within that gray space. A 40-grain piece of lead traveling at approximately the speed of sound can absolutely cause immediate and catastrophic collapse to the central nervous system, circulatory system, or respiratory system of anything that walks on North American soil. It's a grievously compromised round and far from the best choice, but it is technically capable of stopping a fight quickly, and that is worth being aware of. All these reasons are, after all, the very same reasons why militaries in more than a few developed nations have issued autoloading 22s for niche survival applications. From Kastner's cutthroats in the Aleutian Islands campaign to Israeli fighter pilots with AR-7s in their ejection seat, the point is that even organizations with a mission that goes well beyond just survival have historically given some credence to this idea that there are situations in which the benefits of the 22 outweigh its drawbacks. One final thing I'll add in is that while it's less important, an added benefit of having a survival rifle in 22LR is that it increases your ability to shoot recreationally or train with your weapon, possibly even train others with your weapon under less than ideal circumstances. When I was driving away from my house for what I thought might well be the last time, one of the things which was annoying me is that I realized I wasn't going to be able to go to the range later that week. Circumstances outside my control had massively reduced the amount of ammunition I had available to me, and I wasn't about to go burn off what little I had just for fun. One very real benefit of being able to carry extra ammo in a civilian survival situation is that it opens up the possibility of still being able to shoot recreationally, maintain a perishable skill set, or pass that skill set on to others without wincing every time that trigger gets pulled. So for everyone who is on board with the concept of a Survival 22, however, we still have one big problem to address, and that's going to lead us to the crux of this video. To whatever degree that I had become convinced of the utility of the 22LR cartridge, I found myself utterly unimpressed by the 22LR platforms which were commercially available. I've already admitted that the round itself is inherently compromised, so I am in no mood to make any further concessions regarding the platform that we're shooting it out of. As far as I could tell, there are really 5 commercially available options, none of which I consider to be acceptable. The first option is essentially just run-of-the-mill budget-price recreational plinkers. Don't get me wrong, these are awesome firearms, which I love and I recommend to people all the time. Here's my personal Marlin Model 60, which I absolutely love, but these totally lack the build quality and feature sets I would expect from a truly optimized survival rifle. These are useful tools, but far from ideal. So the second option is survival configurations of those aforementioned budget-priced recreational plinkers. These often include useful features like takedown capability or clever storage compartments, but they generally fail to address the core issues we previously established, which again are build quality and feature set. Next up, there are some pretty awesome premium takes on these same recreational plinkers, and these often do legitimately address my build quality concerns. The problem with these premium offerings is that they're almost universally designed for niche applications like ultralight backpacking or silhouette challenge competitions, and therefore not optimized for the more specific capabilities which I was looking for. Moving on, there are a host of training aids which are designed to replicate the handling and characteristics of tactical weapon systems, which at first glance seem like they could be a pretty good option to me. Unfortunately, I quickly determined that most of these training aids lacked the build quality and purpose-built reliability of the weapon systems they were designed to emulate. I didn't want a 22 which was designed to look and feel like a fighting rifle. I wanted a fighting rifle, which happened to be a 22. Finally, there are a number of clever and cool but obsolete survival rifle configurations that may have made a lot of sense at their time of development, but fall well short of modern expectations. The AR-7 is a great example of this. I didn't need something that I could fit into a fighter pilot's ejection seat 50 years ago or a break action single shot with a 410. I needed an entirely different animal. Luckily, by this point in the process, I felt pretty clear as to what I needed to prioritize in order to achieve the result I was looking for. I wanted an auto-loading weapon which combined the versatility, sustainability, and low signature of the 22 long rifle cartridge with the durability, ergonomics, and force-multiplying technological enablers of the modern combat carbine. More than that, I wanted a compact ecosystem of components which would simplify firearm logistics as much as was humanly possible. Next time I was in a survival situation, whether I was loading up a car or striking off into the woods on foot, I wanted to be able to mindlessly and instantly grab a self-contained system such that I could devote the remaining 99% of my time and attention to other tasks. I wanted the confidence of knowing that in 5 seconds flat, I could secure the ability to shoot and move like I was in the 21st century and secure that ability indefinitely, even if I never saw a gun shop, a power outlet, or another human being again. Obviously, that's a tall order and nothing in this world comes without compromise, but I think I got pretty close. So now let's get into the TORSS system itself by breaking down exactly what it is and how it works. Right off the bat, one of the things I want to continue to emphasize is the fact that the TORSS is more than a weapon. It is a system of complementary capabilities. It is scalable, it has modules, and it has redundancies. Ultimately, it is at its best when all of the pieces of the puzzle are working together in harmony. That said, the weapon is the heart of the system, so let's start there before turning our attention to the peripheral modules. As previously established, I came to the conclusion that I wanted a purpose-built 22 long rifle action rather than something which had been forced into the form factor of a centerfire action. I think this lends itself to reliability, which is important when we consider the marginally less reliable nature of rimfire ammo. We can get around a lot of this by using good quality ammo, but the point is that rimfire is inherently a little bit more finicky. Another benefit of purpose-built rimfire actions is that they typically use purpose-built rimfire magazines, which are another crucial ingredient in overall system reliability. With all that in mind, I based my weapon on the venerable Ruger 10/22 action. My experiences and research lead me to believe that this is the most proven and dependable autoloading 22 action ever devised with the fewest failure points. Additionally, I think it's got the best magazines. All Ruger 10/22 magazines are pretty good. However, I find the BX-15 to be the best available compromise. It's more durable and reliable than the BX25, yet offers more capacity and much better ergonomics than the BX1. I use a factory stock Ruger bolt and recoil spring, as well as a factory upgraded BX trigger system, all of which are excellent. Interestingly enough, this project did lead me to discover that Ruger factory receivers are, however, less excellent. Although this has apparently been common knowledge among serious rimfire guys for decades, I had to find out the hard way that the barrel interfaces of factory Ruger 1022 receivers are almost universally canted slightly to the left. I went through 4 of them before I discovered that I was neither crazy nor unlucky. That's just how they are, apparently. This is not a problem for most applications, considering that the vast majority of 1022s use barrel-mounted iron sights. However, it was a deal breaker for my build. We're jumping ahead here, but I'm going to be relying on single aiming point optics and parallel zeroed infrared aiming lasers, so I really need that barrel to be pointing forward. Consequently, I used aftermarket receivers for both of my TORSS builds. By the way, this is my Mark 1, this is my Mark 2. My Mark 1 uses a Brownells made receiver with an integrated Picatinny rail, and my Mark 2 uses a Fletcher Rifleworks 1122 receiver with the open top feature. I was pleased to find that both of these were machined within acceptable tolerances. I only had to buy one from each manufacturer to get my desired result. With the whole action together, these weapons exhibit excellent reliability and acceptable ergonomics. No, the ergos are not as good as something like an M4, but as far as 22s go, they are very, very good. The manual of arms is strangely reminiscent of a scaled down AK, and it's pretty intuitive once you get used to it. The crossbolt safety has been the hardest thing for me to adapt to personally. It works fine, it just feels out of place with all of the other ergonomics of the weapon. I've totally caught myself fiddling my thumb and even sweeping for an AK style lever before I realized that it's just right there in front of the trigger guard. I did stick with Ruger factory barrels. Both the Mark 1 and the Mark 2 use a tensioned steel barrel in a bull profile aluminum sleeve. These barrels are what come with the Ruger Target Lite model, and while in retrospect there are totally lighter options, which I probably should have considered, these are very accurate barrels and they do a pretty good job of keeping the weapon from getting too nose heavy, so I'm not splitting hairs and I don't plan to replace them. Additionally, they come conveniently threaded 1/28 for suppressor. I'll talk more about the significance of suppression later. Obviously, a critical part of this overall system is going to be the chassis. I am using the Midwest Industries M-Lock chassis system, which provides enormous durability, AR furniture compatibility, and most importantly, the ability to configure modern enablers. You may note on my Mark II build, I had to remove a significant amount of material from the chassis in order to accommodate the unique profile of the Fletcher receiver. This is not commercially available, but hacksaws are. So if anyone decides to reproduce this at home, it's totally possible. Just pay attention and have fun. Now let's turn our attention to furniture. Obviously, we've got standard AR pistol grips here, Sans Beavertail. These are ergonomically excellent, but ultimately these specific brands and models are unimportant. I'm not really picky with pistol grips. I just had these ones lying around and they have storage compartments for batteries, cleaning kits, or emergency ammo, all of which I like. Moving rearward, you can see I have side fold-in stock compatibility on both the Mark 1 and Mark 2, which I'm a huge fan of whenever possible. Side folders are basically all benefit with no drawback and allow for the weapon to be transported more discreetly, among other obvious advantages in mobility. The Midwest chassis uses a mil-spec buffer tube, so I spliced in the Hera Arms SFU, or side folding unit, which is a robust mechanism perfect for this type of application. After significant trial and error, I went with a Magpul SL-K for my buttstock. It has a low profile and a slightly reduced length of pull, which helps make up for the slight length of pull increase that came from the SFU. Friends of the channel know I'm an SKS guy. I also shoot my M4 in the stock half-closed position. I like a short length of pull. Obviously, this weapon has no recoil whatsoever, so shoulderable surface area is not a consideration. Finally, we can move on to enablers, and you can see both the Mark 1 and Mark 2 are more or less configured the same in that regard. Basically, what I wanted was a modern optic, backup iron sights, white and IR flood lighting, and an IR designator. We'll talk more about how the infrared spectrum and night vision fits into the TORSS theory of use in a moment, but for now, let's wrap up on these enablers. The Mark 1 is currently set up with a comfortably risen EOTech 518 for AA battery convenience and passive aiming excellence. For backup irons, we have a set of Magpul MBUS 3s, both mounted on the same plane of the front handguard. I've got the short BCM vertical grip here, which helps me index my thumb to the fire button. on a 700 lumen InForce WMLX Gen 2 white and IR light, and I can easily roll right over to the tape switch for my Holosun 221G laser aiming module with slaved green and IR laser designators. The visible laser is important on this version for zeroing, as the Mark I has to be fully disassembled in order to get into the action. That takedown issue was solved on the Mark II model with the open top receiver. As you might have also gathered, I made substantial efforts on the Mark II to save weight, as the Mark I is not a light weapon. As for the optic, I've got a basic Holosun 403R riding on a knockoff Unity mount. In a perfect world, this would be a T2 riding on the real deal, but we work with what we have sometimes. The Mark I ate up a ton of my budget. That said, I'm not going to beat up on the Holosun too much because it really is a phenomenal optic for the price. It has excellent brightness settings, its durability is terrific, and really the only thing that I can say that's not great about it is that it has poor NV light transmission, especially compared to the EOTech. That said, I'm using binos these days, and light transmission under dual tubes is much less important than it is under something monocular. A benefit of this Unity style mount is it does include the rear sight aperture, which removes the need for an additional rear iron sight. Up front, I've got a basic M-bus front sight riding on an Arisaka low profile M-lock to Picatinny adapter to get good alignment. Once again, I use the same vertical foregrip and enabler configuration, although I'm now using the smaller and lighter 400 lumen WML Gen 2, as well as the smaller and lighter Holosun 117IR. Without the need for chassis takedown, as facilitated by that open top feature, that visible laser is much less critical. Finally, both rifles have a number of well-placed QD sockets and are perfectly complemented by a Magpul 2-to-1 point quick adjust multi-mission sling. I've been really happy with the MS3 and MS4. So now that we've gone tip to butt on the weapon itself, let's expand our view to the system as a whole. Remember that the TORSS is more than just the weapon, it's the whole system. If it helps, you can think of the weapon as infantry or combat arms, while the TORSS is the army as a whole. Combat arms has all the bite, but without support, that bite pretty quickly turns into a bark and then into a hungry whine. The support in this metaphor are going to be 5 peripheral modules of equipment which sustain the weapon. Exploring these modules will also serve to help us define the full capabilities of the system and expand on the real-life use cases in which those capabilities might be useful. So the first module is going to be ammunition storage, specifically battle packs. As previously established, one of the biggest advantages of the 22 long rifle is the ability to carry huge amounts of ammunition. Ammo doesn't grow on trees, so if you don't want to be dependent on resupply, your best option is to carry as much ammo as humanly possible, and these battle packs make that very convenient. The point here is just because we're carrying stupid amounts of ammo does not mean we need to be stupid about how we carry that ammo. These homemade battle packs consist of premium CCI ammunition stored in plastic drawers, silica preservative packs, multiple zip-top freezer bags, all sealed in vinyl tape protected by duct tape. As a cherry on top, each one has a handy-dandy razor blade taped on for convenient opening. This system lets you easily scale your total inventory to your circumstances, and it keeps that ammunition safe and dry until you need it. When you do crack a pack, you've got that extra Ziploc bag to rapidly protect and keep track of loose rounds in case things get hectic. I've got a backpack loaded up with 10 of these battle packs, or 5,000 rounds, and that only weighs about 35-40 pounds. That's super easy and efficient to throw in the back of a car, or if I'm in a survival situation which requires foot movement, I can rapidly open it up, grab as many battle packs as I can carry, and beat feet accordingly. My personal grab-and-go bag will carry 4 battle packs or 2,000 rounds. However, my go bag does also carry a water filter and a few jars of peanut butter. So let's just say that anyone stuck in a survival situation with me who doesn't have a go bag of their own is pretty quickly going to find themselves employed carrying the rest of my ammo. All that service is going to cost me is going to be unlimited clean drinking water and a couple of spoonfuls of peanut butter a day. The last thing I'll say about the battle pack module is that each of these packs contains 300 rounds of 40-grain copper-plated round-nose mini-mags and 200 rounds of polymer-coated clean 22 subsonics. These rounds have pretty similar trajectories to a point and both cycle reliably without needing me to swap between recoil springs. Obviously, the mini-mags are a great general-purpose round with some decent punch to them, and the subsonics come into play when signature reduction is a priority, which dovetails us nicely into the next module. The next module is rather simple, and that's just going to be a suppressor. This isn't technically required, as the reduced signature of a 22LR is not dependent on suppression. However, a dedicated can really elevates that feature to the next level. To put it really simply, suppressed subsonic 22 is basically the pot of gold at the end of the signature reduction rainbow. Muzzle flash becomes literally non-existent, and the report is muffled to the point that it can only be heard from extremely close distances, and even then, it's not going to be obviously identifiable as a gunshot. You could pop one of these off in a library bathroom, and the guy in the stall next to you might just think you dropped your phone. Obviously, that's a stupid example, but the point here is that that level of discretion could be extraordinarily useful in a civilian survival situation. It gives you the ability to use your weapon without notifying everybody and their mother of your location and disposition. Sometimes drawing attention is a good thing, and sometimes it's a bad thing, and a suppressor allows you to control and mitigate that risk as you see fit. Also, it can make you a really scary adversary in the dark, which once again segues us into the next module. Our third module is going to be night vision capability. Like the suppressor, this isn't technically required, but boy does it sure bring the TORSS into a category of its own when you have it. Earlier I mentioned the anemic ballistics of the 22 were a problem, but a workable problem. In my mind, this is what working that problem looks like. This is tactical alchemy in which we turn a weakness into a strength. We know that the 22 is technically viable, but comparatively abysmal for force-on-force applications. It's never going to win a fair fight, so our job becomes making sure the fight is anything but fair. That's basically an elevator pitch for night vision, by the way, keeping Americans from having to fight fair since 1942. Now, I realize we're starting to stray from the realm of natural disasters, and we're getting closer to the realm of total social cataclysm, but the thing is, fantastic scenarios require fantastic capabilities, and that is the best way to describe what happens when you combine 22 caliber suppression with modern night vision capability. This gives you the ability to dynamically maneuver in total darkness, as well as to identify and accurately engage targets using passive aiming and active IR designation. You can operate in a spectrum of light and sound that very few human beings have the technology and training to detect or respond to. Now, I will absolutely concede that the best use of this technology would almost always be to disengage, avoid conflict, avoid detection. The first rule of surviving a gunfight is, unless you have to, don't show up. That said, the point here is that this insane combination of low signature and night vision capability creates an active self-protection option which should not be taken lightly. If you ever found your life's purpose reduced to settling a score with a rival band of post-apocalyptic scavengers, there might just be a tactically savvy way of going about that. When we talk about weapon systems, more options are always better than fewer. In a similar vein, the fourth module is going to be the battle belt. The fact that it's a belt, I guess, is unimportant, but the point here is that if we're going to expect to use the TORSS like we would a modern combat carbine, we need modern load-bearing gear to match. Obviously, there are tons of ways that modern kit can be configured, and a great deal of this comes down to operator preference. So if you're more of a PC or LBV guy, more power to you. The basic and non-negotiable capabilities your kit needs to provide are basically just going to be magazine presentation and retention. You can see that my belt has 7 magazines readily accessible on my support side, all of which can be retained in a 12 o'clock folding dump pouch. Ruger BX15 magazines don't exactly have the best tactically oriented aftermarket support, but I found that these USGI flashbang pouches work pretty well. You can see that I went ahead and sewed some loop portions to the rearmost 3 pouches, which gives me a visible and tactile indicator that these pouches contain magazines loaded with subsonic ammunition. Obviously, the tactile element is critical for retrieving magazines under nods. If we're going to have the capability of operating in the dark, we need an ergonomic and tactically sound foundation to work from. Otherwise, it's really just for show. As for the rest of the belt, none of these are things that are explicitly related to the TORSS system, but rather are basic supplies which you might as well have if you're going to be wearing a belt. I've got a trauma kit, a multi-tool and sewing kit, canteen pouch with NVG insert, and of course, a sidearm. Again, secondary weapon systems like this Glock 17 go well beyond the scope of this video, but suffice to say, I think there is an interesting conversation to be had regarding the potential value of backing up a 22 LR primary with a 9mm secondary. The phenomenal gun tuber and my personal spirit animal, Paul Harrell, has some pretty cool videos on that subject. Finally, we move to the last module, which is electronic sustainment. The whole point of choosing a 22 was to prolong sustainment so we could keep that weapon up for as long as possible without resupply. With that in mind, we need to make sure that our electronic enablers last as long as our ammunition does and don't shut off after a few cold evenings in the woods. Luckily, that is not a hard problem to solve. My solution is a lightweight and highly compact portable power station which captures, stores, and distributes more solar energy than I would ever need to keep this weapon up and running more or less indefinitely. I have a total of 5 panels with 2 outputs, 2 power banks, and charging cradles for AA, AAA, and 123 batteries. This system allows me to collect and store solar power when available and distribute it when needed. The panels can be hung from a rucksack or secured to the top of a vehicle to charge on the move, or can fold up and disappear into a pack when not needed. This is a simple, convenient, and cost-effective solution which allows me to keep my nods, lights, lasers, and optical systems operational, whether or not I have access to a power grid or additional resources. It is a truly self-sufficient system, which is obviously appealing in a survival platform. As I've tried to make clear from the beginning of the video, this system is designed to make more sense and make your life easier proportionately to how bad of a situation you are in. And that's about it, guys. The TORSS in all of its glory. I know it's kind of an odd duck and definitely a system which I think most people might rationally not want to like, but I can say in all honesty, I do believe that at this point, this is one of the most practical firearms that I own. I spend a lot of time in the woods by myself, and I really enjoy finding ways to decrease my reliance on factors which are outside of my control, and I think this weapon fits that lifestyle extremely well. Obviously, your mileage may vary, and at the end of the day, I chose a provocative title for this video simply to get your attention. It's not my goal to convince you that something like this is or is not a good choice for you. My goal is mainly to entertain and offer what I hope was a thought-provoking and novel take on a conversation which I bet is extremely familiar to a lot of you fellow gun nerds. As always, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. I already know I'll get a healthy smattering of 22 hate mail, and that's fine. I have a couple of regular detractors who are working really hard to improve their literacy, so any excuse to practice stringing a sentence together is a good thing. For those of you who have mastered the art of syntax and civil discourse, however, I would especially love to hear your thoughts and feedback, as at the end of the day, I am on YouTube to challenge my own ideas and hopefully grow. If you did enjoy this video, please consider hitting like, subscribe, and or checking out my other videos. That's what motivates me to make more. Until next time, thanks again, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.